keynote looks like. Thank you for coming along. The small history of this talk is that I was asked to talk about the MAP project via Zoom on Thursday evening, and I thought that it would be a better opportunity to perhaps present it here and sort of, from my point of view, a bit more of a live kind of audience. So for the next half hour, I'm just going to take you through that process. So it all began back in September 2017, and Jackie Helmsley, who was the cultural manager at Lake Macquarie Council, had put together a bit of a business plan for this thing that she was calling the Spears Point Multi-Art Space. And she contacted me around that time, actually early 2018, and I had done a building at the Art Gallery. This is an internal shot of that, and she knew that I worked at the university. And so she gave me a call and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this thing, but we're making an application to the New South Wales government under this scheme for funding, and would I be interested, or would the university be interested in collaborating on that proposal to the New South Wales government? So on the right-hand side there, that's the next slide. Okay. Okay, sorry, we're going to have to get out of that. Okay, I'm going to skip that bit. So yeah, Art Pavilion and this business plan, and then it was, the date is somewhere here, but May 2018, we were successful. So the New South Wales government funded the building 1.35 million, and the building was meant to cost 2.1 million. And at that stage, we then formed a collaboration with, and I say we, the university, formed a collaboration with Lake Macquarie City Council. And from our point of view, it was a little bit, essentially it was a standard architectural commission in that sense. So there was a proposal made which outlined the different stages of the project's development, which was essentially, briefing through concept, through DAs, through to construction documentation, which was a critical thing. We weren't just doing ideas here. We were going to turn those ideas into something that could be constructed. So we did essentially a fee proposal, and that was framed as a research grant. And this is a really important step, and Sue-Ann is aware of this. I should say that Sue-Ann was part of the early kind of dealings in the first thing to kind of set these things up, architecture as research. So you're actually taking a project that could be done, I suppose, in different ways, perhaps by the private sector, but here it was going to be done as a research grant, and there was going to be different spin-offs. And the conversation I'd had with Jackie Helmsley was that what we would do is that it would be run as a studio project, and I was running third year, and the timing of that worked really well. And what we would do is that the students would essentially all get the opportunity to design the concept for this building, and we would then have a judging process, and there would be a winner. And that winner, that winning concept, would we'd all then pile on top of it, and we would build it, essentially. That was the idea. Where are we? Here we are. We're about there somewhere, and this is Lake Macquarie, this big, beautiful body of water here, which has one little outlet at Swansea. A bit of coalface, just as a reference to the exhibition that's around us. Just zooming in a little bit more, so this is the site, and you can see we're right at the very northern tip of Lake Macquarie. And this body of water coming down here is called Cockle Creek, and again this is the top now of Lake Macquarie. This is, the locality here is called Spears Point, and the local council office is actually in Spears Point, so the main council building is in that place. And then zooming in a little bit more, you've essentially got this what I'll call a very European park, I suppose. These little bit of remnant mangrove sitting over here, a little bit more mangrove sitting over here, but essentially sporting fields and something that we'd associate with a European park. And then zooming right in. So what's happening here is that on the right-hand side, this promenade, which is 300 metres long, and it's 10 metres wide. And that was part of the master plan, and the master plan was meant to end in a landmark. it was literally a landmark. And obviously this proposal was that the landmark at the end of the promenade would actually be this building. And there was a car park here, and that had its own history, but that was going to be removed and the building was going to be at the end of that. And there you can see that remnant kind of mangrove sitting here. And I suppose the thing to sort of point out here too, and I'll come back to it, is that because it's at the northern tip of a body of water, a southerly just roars across that water. And if you're there, when a southerly is coming through, particularly through winter, you're getting it right in your face, and the water is salty and so on. A few historical shots. This is the site that I've just been identifying. This is Nine Islands Bridge. Is it 9 or 7? But that's the main sort of road that still exists. But there was a pedestrian bridge that sat, that actually connected the site to this sort of remnant mangrove. And there's this sort of mangrove. So it's just kind of interesting. And back through history, this is the site, and there was a little building there. And it's just interesting to sort of trace it back. And Cockle Creek itself would have been just amazingly beautiful. You can imagine what this would have looked like in colour. Just amazing. But of course what happened was that further up Cockle Creek, they built a sulphide works. And it wasn't long before that's what Cockle Creek looked like. And what's all that white stuff? That's dead fish. So the pollutants out of that sulphide works were sort of pumped into Cockle Creek. And so what you see in Cockle Creek at the moment is really it's a remnant of what it was, I suppose. The other thing in passing, and of course, I could speak a little bit at length about this, but, this is a book on the left-hand side written in 1827, Specimens of a Dialect of the Aborigines of New South Wales, being the first attempt to form their speech into a written language. And where did that occur? When I say the first time, what are they talking about? They're talking about the Australian Aborigines. Where did they do that? In Lake Macquarie, Awabba. The Awabakal. So this is an Awabakal dictionary. And on the right-hand side, Threckle, this is Threckle, this is Threckle, 1892 is the actual dictionary, which is fantastic. And it's an amazing document, and you can still get it, and I've worked with that. So the site, this is a photo by Kieran, who's a student, just this sort of remnant thing. And the reason I'm sort of harking on this a little bit is that this was at the end of the promenade. And, can you get to it? And can you actually take something like this, which is a remnant of the landscape, and perhaps start to re-identify this European park? The whole idea of the park in this country is a bit funny. And look to, we've raised it in different places and haven't been quite successful, but, this photo, so this is the first day that all of the students came to site, and we were going to meet we're going to hear about the brief. And it was one of those days where the wind was blowing, it was raining, and I arrived, and this is me just arriving, and every student was huddled into this little shelter, and I thought, perfect, you're seeing the site at its prime at this point. You can understand it, because if you go there on a summer's day and whatever, it can all appear quite pretty, and this is to make you feel that the site is pretty. So we did all of this, and Lake Macquarie City Council are amazing. I thought they were amazing at this point, and I think they still are really amazing. And we, the people up the front here, ended up being people that just became part of the project. So we have all these consultants, as you normally do in any architectural project, but 4 or 5 of the critical consultants, landscape, structural, and geology, and a few other consultants are actually embedded within Lake Macquarie City Council, and then we have external consultants as well, but these guys are actually embedded. So this is all the students, and this is being briefed essentially. And then it just ran as sort of a normal, I suppose, student project. This is again Kieran and he made these very beautiful models and so on. I think that's why I took this particular photo. But every student went through a process where obviously, they presented their work and they were graded. And then the top 20 students that we graded, and I think it was 120 odd in the year, the top 20 students were then invited to exhibit. And this is the foyer of Lake Macquarie City Council, and you can see here the different plinths and so on. And for about a month, really, I think, these models sat there, and all the councillors walked by them, and everyone who went into the Lake Macquarie walked by all these models, and it was sort of a bit of a head changer, because now you've got this architectural work there. It's Kay Fraser, the Lord Mayor, who's still a really big supporter of the project. I had to throw that in, and so we formed a judging panel, and I asked Pete to be on the judging panel, and he did. And where was the judging occurred? Well, of course, it occurred in the chambers. And sorry, we had 20, and then from 20 it went to 5, and then there was 5 students. And so Samantha, Yehiyut Ong, Will Stevo. Is Will here? No. I haven't seen Will in ages. That's all. Kieran, that I've mentioned a couple of times, and Sammy, and of course Sammy won, and she can't be here tonight either. And Sammy won, and it was great, and it was very festive. And again, Kay Fraser, Lord Mayor, and there we are, all kind of collected. So it was a really good vibe, actually. It was a great thing to do, and this is now sort of November 2018, and the proposal that I'd made said that when we got to this point, at this point we would just immediately go to the DA officer. So we've been fed the brief from the council, and that was all cool. And the first moment was, let's go and meet the DA officers and let's work this thing through. So this was Sammy's plan. And a very workable plan, really simple. Just to explain the building. The building is still 130 square metres. Like if you're all architects, 130 square metres is nothing. So it was 130 square metres around, this stage, and it's still about that. There was one big square space, which was the multi-use space. There was a foyer that you might enter. These were particular kind of viewing windows out into the landscape. There were some services, and that's about it, really, and it's sort of open onto the landscape. On the top right-hand side, you can see the promenade. And so, as a tutor into this scheme, I said, my personal opinion was that the promenade had to end in the mangrove. It had to end in this place. It had to end in the lake. It couldn't end in a building. That's personal preference, but, and this is a scheme that kind of did that. But, and Sammy's drawing is very beautiful. But as soon as we had that meeting, the first thing that came out of it was that there's a 1.4 metre floodplain over it, and your building has to lift 1.4 metres up. So we went from a building that was basically sitting on the ground, and you could just walk up into it, into something that was now 1.5 metres up off the ground.
That must have been super frustrating that it wasn't in the brief that you...
Well, it's because, it wasn't in the brief because it hadn't been tested at the DA level. And then the thing was, we said, well, hang on, and then there was a whole dialogue there about, hey, we shouldn't be creating a refuge in the middle of the park because people might actually run to it if there's a flood. And they didn't really take that. And then the thing that was sort of a bit of a sealer, and there's some great people here again, and no, I shouldn't mention names, but Tony Farrell, who was a very clear kind of thinker, said, look, we ask people all through this locality to lift their buildings for flood, and so we're not going to avoid it for ourselves. And we went, fair enough. So that's what we did, but that then started this process, and there's a few of the students here, which is great to see, who were part of this process of lifting the building up. And essentially, as soon as you lift it up, you can't really ignore the promenade because you're actually creating a plinth, and so it sort of forced us in some ways to sort of take on the promenade. So that's it looking east. And if you look west, of course, like now, it would look a bit like this, where you've got the sun in your eyes and so on, and that remnant is sort of sitting there. And so then we went through a bit of a design process, where we headed with that was we started to say, okay, so this big box, the multi-art space, 10 metres by 10 metres by about 7 metres high, which is devoid of the space, and it's still like that. Maybe what we do is we put a door on each side, so you can open up both doors and you can look through the building. And there was a battle to get them to do that. They wanted one door but not two, and they didn't want to operate both sides, and so there was a bit of a thing that went on there. Obviously we need a ramp, and then the ramp was required as the main entry. There's no way that you were going to have stairs, you know, where normal people use the stairs and then, you know, the person in the wheelchair or whatever used the ramp. Everyone had to enter by the ramp. And then at the front there, what we did was the boulevard, or the promenade ends at this point, and then this was meant to be like a landscaped area, and maybe it's sort of, you know, it was sort of, you know, I wouldn't say grass, but it was something that was sort of soft and landscaped, and that sort of stepped you up to the building, and that was the original plan. And so these are just obviously photographs of the model. This is a 1:50 model, and I should say I think everything here was just made out of scraps in the studio. I have a policy that if, you know, we've just done this gyoza kitchen, and we barely bought anything. Seamus would have to answer that, but you can just use stuff around the studio, and this model was essentially made out of leftover stuff. So I should just say, so that's obviously looking, so the lake is to the bottom of the screen, north is to the top, and this is the southern elevation. And through the design, these two sort of sandy windows was an open window, and one was this exhibition window. And the other thing was that the budget for the building was 2.1 million, and we had to lift it up 1.5 metres, and they said, no, the budget's still the same. And we said, well, you know, so the building ended up having to be sort of squeezed, and so we were trying to look at different ways, and it was meant to be concrete walls and things, but that wasn't really going to work at a cost level. There's no way it was going to blow it out of the water. So ended up starting to talk about brick, and that created problems because there were people had looked at brick buildings, and brick buildings were suburban buildings, and this wasn't suburban, and so there was a whole battle, and in fact it went on for months about that. But I'll touch on that. But these obviously just models of photos of the model, and the date here is January 2019, and the dates are important because, I mean, we're now a year and a half after this point, but the plan that came out of this, I think this is Charlie's plan. Does beautiful plans, but the plan of the building is, well, in January 2019 was that, and it hasn't sort of changed a whole lot from that point. There's the promenade, there was this landscaped area, there was this multi-art space with the two doors, this was the ramp. You walk in, there was some services, a kitchen, served you some tea and coffee and champagne and so on. There was a deck out the back, and there was this exhibition window, as we called it, this sort of viewing window. And then this is the big space, 10 metres by 10 metres by 7 metres high. In fact, it's 10 metres high on the outside. And now these are, and so it's out to tender at the moment. So, and the building price, just to sort of jump, you know, we're now talking today almost. I mean, it's doing RFIs and whatever for tender, but it's, the building cost is around 4 million now. So it's moved from 2.1 to about 4, and there's a whole process there that went through. But the big part was that it started to engage with the landscape, started to get a little bit more serious, and the big thing was that it has generated its own political will. So, you know, Kay, Lord Mayor, big supporter. Other councillors, and we've made presentations to councillors, they just love it. I mean, this thing, you know, the whole idea of this building and students and, you know, what it's meant to, you know, this whole thing about bringing this new culture to Lake Macquarie, something that it doesn't have, is so important to them. And I just threw this one in too. So again, these are tender drawings. The last one and this one, there's about 70 sheets in the set, and I'm not going to show you all of those, but this blue line is really interesting. So that's the promenade. It ends, and then the building sits literally at the end of that promenade. And then there's a whole process to the way that now this is like a flat area, so the building can engage on both edges. There is an existing car park up the top there, which we've added some accessible parking to, and so on. Here is Lake Macquarie, like the water's edge. But the blue line, as again, there's all these sort of things that just occurred in the process, is actually the title. And this blue line, this blue line is actually the original line of that part of land. So this is fill. But that means that no one owns that. That is water. And so we're okay, but you can see that this is like a little bit of pathway and so on that's sort of into that. And this is another one we don't have to worry about as much. But it is interesting, you see, that this water actually came in at that point. And I just wanted to show you the plan again. These are tender drawings, but you know, the plan that we sort of arrived at almost 2 years ago actually is pretty much still the same. It's sort of, you know, changed a little bit in substance and bits and pieces, but it's essentially still the same. And as I said, it's 130 square metres total internal space, so it's a really small building, really small. When you think that this space here is, well, about 95 square metres, you know, there's not a whole lot more sort of going on. Just through as a photo I took while we were making this model, there's the model and bits and pieces. So we did work in the makerspace. This is going backwards in time, January 2019. And I just want to show you a couple of source images. So the closest building to it is actually probably the Australian Pavilion in Venice, which is where this photo is. And, you know, it's a white room. It's about the same size, essentially. They've got a lower ceiling than us. Their building cost about 10 times, I think, what ours will cost. But it's essentially something that, when we say multi-arts, it's something that can take performance, it can open up, there might be a band playing, maybe two bands to each side, it can be completely blacked out, so it can do different things. And so the idea of the multi-arts is that it's not really defined, and I think this is where Jackie Helmsley has got it absolutely right, actually, is that, you know, we need to, it's a box that someone else is going to come in and play with and do different things with. The outside of the building, so these are just images actually that we sort of showed the client, and this was okay, but the image that really they had in their mind was something that was kind of shimmering and shiny and lights. That the future was something that looked like that. And bringing them around to something to say, well, you know, Lake Macquarie is such a beautiful place. You just need a building that understands that place. And, you know, bright and shiny and, you know, whatever is going to be ripped to shreds in a southerly. So it's got to harden up. And it's also, it's like it's sitting in a park, you know, and I've done a lot of public architecture in my time. And you've got to imagine a group of 15-year-olds who are just trying alcohol are roaming through the park, and they've got sticks or something, or they've got, you know, something else. I mean, your building is up against that, and it has no protection. It doesn't have protection of neighbours or anything like that. It's there. So you've got these, you know, the elements of environment, but you've also got the elements of society up against it, and they have all kinds of antisocial in this park as well. So trying to sort of move them into this area, and it sort of didn't work, I suppose, and it sort of worked. It sort of worked, but then I made this sort of thing to say, hey, what could happen here is that we've got four sides, and if we start to allow moisture to reside in the building, you could actually start to get some lichens, and you could get some moss growing, and those four sides would be different, and that would own its place. You know, and you know, it's a garden for the outside of the building, and that was the point at which everything changed. And for those, and Sammy's not here, and she's the most. Charlie's probably remembers a bit of this, but the whole thing changed, and all of a sudden we were up against it, and we had to sort of show why it should be brick, and you know, and they were really scared by the fact that they would have to clean it, and what would people say? How, you know, people would write in and so on. So we're still up against that. Sorry?
You could paint it white.
Yeah, you could paint it white. You know, cover it in plastic. And so we had to go through, maybe it should be Corten steel, that's rusty. Or maybe it could be hardy plank, literally, and so we had to go through and show this. Anyway, I saw this building, and it's a very beautiful building in China. I haven't been to it, just seen the photo, but it's essentially a concrete block building, and the brickwork is acting as a screen, I suppose. And I thought, okay, so this is something that we could do, is that we could take the building in and we could put light behind it and it could glow, and so that would be your sparkle, and I did this image thinking, oh, they will just go for this, and completely did not go for it. Not that they attacked it, but they just ignored it. And they still ignore it. So, and it came back, there's no way that we can have holes in the building. I wasn't saying that we'd have holes, and if you're into detailing, what's happening here is that you've got because a masonry veneer wall is a wet wall. It's not. It's always wet. You've got to imagine it's always wet. So there's always a cavity. And so what I was thinking was we put a wet wall that's got holes in it. So what? And then on the inside of that, we then put fibre cement. So it's actually a fibre cement building with a concrete wall in front. And of course, there was lots of little places you see where water could rest. And so that was sort of like, oh yeah, we can get the water resting in there. What are they going to do? It's 10 metres high, and whatever. So this kind of ageing process was something that, it didn't show them this, but something that is still within the building. And I love this slide here, and just the post-industrial garden studio. If you start thinking about algae and lichens as being a garden on the building, and it shows you, it tells you there's a history here, that it's letting you know about something, and maybe we need eyes to kind of see that sort of stuff. So this is what went forward for DA. So these are the drawings for DA, and you can still see I've actually used the patterning, or we have used the patterning for this wall from that other building, and it's sort of dark here and it's light there. And then there's a whole big thing about these hydraulic doors that we didn't want, but we ended up with that. So you've got to sort of, oh yeah, we'll do the hydraulic door thing, but let's go with the brick sort of thing. And so this is the north elevation, and so that big north elevation could be used as something you can project onto or something like that. Again, just get your bearings. That is 10 metres high. Like if that's big when you see that. So this is quite a large thing, and this is the ramp. But it then has at this stage, at DA stage, it had two masonry walls on each side. As it turned out, the SEPTED, which is for crime prevention, didn't like this. And that was because, and I suppose reasonable, that you could walk down here and you could get to the end and someone might be hiding at the end, like around the wall. So when you're outside, SEPTED is all about making sure that you can see what's around you and that you don't feel like you're in danger. So that's the north elevation, and then this is the south elevation, and so there's that window, that sort of funny shaped window. Here's the foyer, and then there's the box sitting at the other side. And that's kind of its general arrangement, essentially. It's promenade, this big box sitting at the end, and the box is the same width as the promenade, so it actually sort of rises literally within a few centimetres. It is the same width. And this kind of window has become stairs. There's the deck, there's the window, and to get past the septet, the masonry walls disappeared, and we end up with a 50mm stainless steel tube, and everything is 304 stainless. And if you know your stainless steels, it's cheaper, but it also goes golden. So, and everything is a mill finish. So this is all stainless steel, and it's welded, but it's what I call maker's mark. So there's no grinding back of any of the welds or anything like that. It's simply welded and left. And it's funny because at the moment the tenderers are all coming back and saying, normally this is polished, and normally this is ground back, and we're just, and the council, I don't know if they really know what that means, but they keep coming back and say, no, it's a mill finish, and
So they're adding 10%.
Well, hopefully they're deducting 10%. I mean, good, because you're not grinding back and polishing. Is that what you mean?
I mean that they add 10% because they don't have to do what they usually do.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, I think stainless steel. And I know Warren has done some projects, in our practice as well, where if you just weld it and the welders say, okay, it's done, and it's still got their waxy chalk marks on it and things like that, they're sort of okay with that because that's what a boil, if they're doing something for a train or a piece of industrial equipment, that's what happens. So that's now the northern wall, and while we did the drawing, the design is actually done by Kira Martin and Claire Lavis, and that's because so this was really interesting, was that always in the budget was some amount, I can't actually remember what it is now, it's something like $10,000 or something, for artists' work on the outside of the building. It was always part of the original budget. And we had an EOI because they weren't happy for us to design it, essentially. And we said, we can do that. They said, no way. So we're going to do an EOI, that's fine. So they did an EOI, and Kira and Claire did this really beautiful design. I'm so glad that we did that and they did that, because it's really beautiful. And what you're looking at is, it's based on the casuarinas, which are actually before the mangroves, and this is a reflection, essentially. So the blue here is actually, and the blue and the red is not a real colour. It's just, this is a tender drawing, so it's typifying a particular kind of brick. So nothing's coloured. It's all concrete block, and the concrete blocks are 400 mils long and they're 90 mils high. So it's like a brick that's longer, like a Roman brick almost, but it's concrete. And some of those bricks are pushed out and pushed in, and then some are flipped around, and we do actually have holes. But the holes don't go all the way through, they wouldn't concede on that, so we've got like a tile adhesive sort of thing at the back. And I had this thing that, if you've got a pattern on the wall, you could design an app so you can put your iPhone up against it and it will read it like a QR code, and it will tell you something. And you can keep changing that. And that's an idea that's within this as well. So what this is actually Braille. It's not Braille, it's Morse code. Morse code. So it's actually dots and dashes, and those dots and dashes represent Awabakal words. And there's a phrase in there which is the one that Lake Macquarie City Council wanted to use, which is, we of Lake Macquarie City Council acknowledge the elders, past and present, so on and so on. And so that's in there, but then there's a whole lot of words for just, out of the dictionary basically, that just represent that place. And at this stage, it exists, but the council, quite rightly, are saying that we need to go and talk to the Awabakal about that, and so we will do that. But this really beautiful northern facade, and it's a little bit in and out, and there's obviously a lot of detailing that goes around that I'm just not going to go through. But Kira ended up, as part of her exhibition, which was about a month ago, she ended up turning that design into a Perspex mould and pressing it into paper. And this is a really bad photo that I took of it, but this really kind of beautiful artistry that comes out of this process. The doors were a real problem, because those doors, if it's 1.5 metres up off the ground, that means that if you fall, because you can only fall 1 metre, if it's 1 metre, fine, you can fall off that. But if it's 1.5, or if it's 1.1, you can't. You've got to put a barrier. But how are we going to put a barrier on these big openings where you want people performing and so on? And this was one of the ideas we had, which was, it's expensive, but you can push down the glass here and you can pull up. This is a building, by the way, by Welsh Major. I went to university, they're both graduates. I went to university with both these guys. Beautiful kind of work, but we ended up with these hydraulic doors, which are really cumbersome and really heavy. And but the whole door, this big door, was 7 metres long by 3.6 metres high. So just think of the size of that, and it's hydraulic. It just sort of goes up like this. And there's two of them, and to get that, the building has become like it's a real steel frame, because it's actually just a piece of machinery. But I'm going to end, because I'm going to talk for that amount of time, and I'm glad that Jai's in the room, because he's a big part of putting these drawings together with Sammy and myself. And and actually it's part of it's almost shouldn't be showing you because it's our resilience exhibition as well, which I think is going to be in this space later next year, I think. But I just thought I'd take the opportunity to, and it just sort of extends a couple of ideas. Because it's been so tight, I've sort of tried to explain the building and where it's at and so on. But another large component of what we're doing is research. We're actually taking the ideas of this thing and moving it out. And I'm very interested in ideas of public space and the occupation of public space. So working in a park for me is like really, really interesting. And I also have a real interest in time, like in the way that things work. And so what we thought we'd do here is that this piece of work is that we would take the site of the MAP building and we would go backwards 10,000 years. And then we would try and depict an image of what the site looked like 10,000 years ago, and then 5,000 years ago, and then 200 years ago, and 100 years ago, and 50 years, and then the present. And then we would go 50 years into the future, 100 years into the future, 200, 500, 1,000, and 10,000. So the next 10 images are basically those images. So this is 10,000 years ago. And it is a guess. Of course it's a guess because there was no cameras. But is it more or less than a guess? I think it's less than a guess because we've actually sort of looked at the processes, I suppose, that make something. So here is the site. Here is Cockle Creek, which is more meandering, and 10,000 years ago the water level was lower. So you get a different kind of physique, I suppose, to the land because it doesn't have as much water on it. And correct me if I get these dates wrong. I think this is now 5,000 years ago. So the water is basically where it is at the moment. But of course, this land was occupied by people. People have been living in it 10,000 years ago. But we certainly know on this site and in this area that people were living in it 7,500 years ago. So, you know, there's sort of settlements here actually, and this is sort of smoke and so on. And then as you then step through, the site is starting to appear. So now this is 200 years ago, and you're starting to get the first settlement, which were Chinese gardens, I think. So this was one of the first sites. And for the people who came to Lake Macquarie and recorded first coming here, they describe it as an Eden. As this amazing place. And you can only imagine what it must have looked like. You've walked through the bush, and the bush is going right down to this quiet water, you know. And because Cockle Creek meets the top here, I mean, we can only suppose these things because there's not a good history of it, that it would have been a meeting place and it would have been a food place. There would have been middens here because of just the way that the waters work. So, and then we're sort of going through to 100 years ago, and you're starting to now see kind of Spears Point kind of arrive. It's still a bit of an Eden. Through to 50 years ago, and you get that land bridge and the site being here, and I suppose, you know, culture starting to sort of appear. And here we are, I think about 20 years ago. Jai, you'll have to correct me here. And then through to present. And so here's now the promenade is kind of appearing. And then it gets interesting. So what happens then in 20 years' time or 10 years' time? Well, what we hope is that, you know, the mangrove here is allowed to sort of move around, and perhaps maybe we're starting to deconstruct those ideas of the European park. And then significantly, perhaps the roads become more arterial, and, you know, sure, we start to occupy the harbour front in different ways, and you can see a densification of the surrounding kind of suburb, to call it that, Spears Point. And then it's sort of dreaming, I suppose, now, you see, because we've got big arterials, and maybe that frees up some of these areas to become, you know, like Tokyo, which is actually what that is. That is more human-centred, it's more pedestrian. But of course, perhaps it floods. And so you get like a return basically to something. Well, not a returning, but you know, the land is starting to be reclaimed, I suppose, by the waters. And then 5,000 years' time, what happens, you know? And, you know, and this is all Jai and Sammy working with these ideas, but, you know, perhaps we live in different ways completely. And perhaps the site has we don't even know what this thing is in the middle, but it's in the middle of something, of new land. And I should say too, that the thing that we started to get, and again I defer to these guys, was that the site starts to become like a lung. It sort of has that shape of a lung. And so this became like a dominating thing, that maybe it was sort of, as the waters came down and did different things, it was actually, it was the life body of everything that was then around it. And then of course, you know, if you push it out to 10,000 years time, we're perhaps getting quite close to what it looked like 10,000 years ago. And so this is now this sort of, you know, reclaiming, and perhaps, you know, for whatever reason, we're sort of grouped around fires and sort of starting to learn how to use the land in different ways. Okay, thanks. Are there any questions? You can ask questions if you like, or we can break and go through.
I'm just curious about how you go through the documentation and the tendering process with the university and the students. Are they doing that in addition to their studies, or is that part of the
Yes,
course?
yeah, and that's a good point, because it's not actually clear. But what actually occurs there is that as soon as we did the concept, that's the end of the student work. So, and then the grant, which is essentially all research assistants, is money to employ students as research assistants, and that's what they're doing. So so every student in the class did concept designs, and everyone got marked, and the course ended at that point. And then the 20 went and did that exhibition, and the 5, and then the 1 was chosen. But that's all now outside of the coursework. So everything, and then as soon as students then do work, that's what the fee proposal is actually there for, is to pay for those people as it goes through. Yeah. And so we had a project team, and I mean, a few of these guys were kind of part of that. And so in the early days, I think it was maybe 15, maybe 20 different people, different points, and then a few, I mean, I'm referring to Charlie particularly, Sammy, and Matthew T was there for a while. So there was sort of a group of 4 or 5 of us there for a longer period of time. And then, as people drifted around, and the project kind of stalled for a period while we got over bricks and things. And so, and Sammy's basically remained involved the whole way through that process. But,
So the university is the lead consultant.
Sorry?
The university is the lead consultant, and then you've engaged on the landscape.
Yes, that's right. And so the only consultant that we've engaged ourselves was the quantity surveyor. But all of the other consultants, electrical, mechanical, hydraulic, blah, are all engaged by the council. So, no, because they're really important questions, because the university also charges 25% for anything. So, sure, we can do the quantity surveying, but you're going to get that plus 25%. So, they did that once with the quantity surveyor, and then they said, okay, I think we'll just do it. I think we'll work it out ourselves. But it's been a great process for them, the council as well, because it's a bespoke building and it's a different kind of process, and they've really been part of
So
that.
it's an interesting approach to practice as well from the practice side of things.
Yeah.
We were talking this morning in our session about how do you bring the work that you're doing as students and academics and practice together, and how can we actually find a model that means that the client has certainty that even if students are involved, they know what they're doing.
Yeah. So.
It's a lovely model here.
Yeah, it is. It kind of works, and I suppose. I mean, when it gets to tender documents, a lot of my resources, like my know-how, has obviously come out to meet that. So I've done a lot of work in that to manage that process. The conceptual thinking and the engagement, has been great to have like this broader body. And where is this heading? Well, if we get a tender that's good, which is likely, then they'll sign in December, and then maybe they'll start building in February. And the idea is that and part of this, I've got two construction managers, Jess Seaver and Patrick Tang, who are also part of this grant, is that it starts to feed into construction management. So as the thing starts to come out of the ground, it then goes there, and you can get access to this thing. It's in the park, it's the access is good, and so hopefully we can use it as a tool to sort of bring out some of those more nitty gritty sort of like, how does it work, not just a construction sense, but how's the process working, like. So I'm really encouraged by that. And so that should be next year, obviously.
Awesome, that's cool.
Yeah. And then of course, then you've got a building that's an art space. So you can then start to use it.
Chris, these illustrations that you and Joe worked on here at the end, the timeline, what are you anticipating? I'm really interested in where these lead.
Yeah. I think the thing that the thing that's, there's a bit of this in this as well, is that we've got to think beyond ourselves a little bit, like if we want to break climate change, or if we want to even get on with each other, you've got to sort of extend time periods. So your question is a really wonderful open sort of question. But the interesting thing about doing this is to try and say to people that while you go down to the site now and it appears as something, it was actually not so long ago something completely different. And perhaps in another short period of time in front of us, it will again be quite different. And I
guess I'm interested in the audience. The obviously there's a provocation inside the drawings. There's an intent inside the drawings. How do you intend to bring these into the world? Is it with the council? Is it with publication? Is it just something you've done for yourselves at the moment?
Yeah. So the impetus to doing it was actually the Resilience exhibition.
Okay.
And I should say too that the way that these are presented is as a bingo card, and that's a narrative that's interesting as well. But they're actually aligned in now it's three lots of 5. There's 14. It's 3 lots of 5, and that gives you a middle, and the middle is a mirror. And the idea of the mirror is that that's you. This is now. Yeah, that's you now. And so that's in the middle, and so this is where you've got 10,000 years behind and 10,000 years in front. But I think when we talk about history in this country, I know this is a good group of people, and people would understand that people have been living here for thousands of years, but we're perhaps in a minority in that respect. Like, people factually know that, but they don't really know it. They sort of say, oh, of course the Aborigines were here, but we go build these rubbishy buildings all over the creeks, and we put awful bloody bridges that people in joggers can jog across, and these were significant moments in this landscape. These are significant moments, and so yeah, and so I think you've got to have a broader, longer view of things. You've actually got to move out into these territories, and so the provocation of time, I think, is really interesting, because you can say, well, maybe it was like this, and maybe it was like that. And it was a great process. I mean, we sort of, I suppose I had the original idea, but then got these guys. But this is your provocation, really. This isn't my provocation. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of, and I think it's really interesting to think about the future. And I think if you think about the future and you think about the past, you can't deny some of the habits that people had about dealing with the landscape and how we used it, and I think we can survive in more light ways. And, it goes back to the building, they don't want to have algae growing on it or moss or something, lichen, because that reeks of, it's getting old. But we've got to change that point of view, because that's nuts. That's crazy. That's actually that's it living. It's living, and it's proving that it's living in that location by accepting what's around it. And then as soon as you can do that, then other animals, insects and so on will start to move in, and perhaps you can actually find a new order. So, the people who lived in this country for a long period of time, they were interested in how the landscape reacted to things that they did to it, and then the landscape did something, and they designed it in a way that they could sort of slightly benefit from it. So I think that's an interesting thing.
I mean, I'll kind of talk to you about it afterwards, but as a moment in time where both speculative history and speculative futures are, rife within that many artistic communities, just this whole potency of advocacy through illustration and the particular capacity that we have to do that. I guess I'm just thinking this is part of the project, but it's something else that I think could lead to a project of its own.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that's hopefully the MAP project, now we've sort of got it to this point, maybe it can lead a whole lot of other projects. As I said, we're dealing with a building that houses performance and multi-arts. We don't even know what that is yet. So there's all of that, and then there's all of these other things. And can you start to break down the order of a European park? And if you see, if you take what I just said and put it in front of a whole lot of councillors and whatever, that is outrageous. That's outrageous to even suggest that you would do that, and not because they don't know what it is or whatever, but they're completely scared of what the public will say. That they'll write in.
I was going to say, sorry, Chris, how has the feedback from the community been? Have you found that it's varied? Have you found that it's positive? Exciting?
Yeah, I think when we put in the DA and it came, and then there was some sort of group who must complain about everything, and I think, and it came back and they said, there's 12 objections. And I went, fantastic. I mean, I've worked on a project that's had 350 objections. And it wasn't even, so it's like 12. Yes, that's great. And they said, and so they went through each one and had to dissect it and, But I think the community, is pretty accepting. Having said that, you're building a building in a park, and a park is public space, and so this is a special moment. But I think we can argue these things if you're reorganising public space, so it is public space at the moment, and it remains as public space. And so that's a really, I think that's kind of critical in these things. I don't want to talk about what I put on the walls, but down at Honeysuckle, that's public space too, but it's about to be owned by some, toffee, basically, who probably earned their money destroying something, So it's like, no, but this is what we should rally against, And so the feedback from the public, as much as they know about it, has been really positive, particularly at that early days, as people were coming in and seeing the different ideas. But you do get these sort of trolls, I suppose. Newcastle City Council has them, and Lake Macquarie has them.
Keyboard warriors?
Yeah, they tend to be past their working life, a bit of time on their hands, and they know everything, But for me, I don't care about those people, But the councillors do.
And it'll be interesting to get some feedback from the Indigenous community on the artwork as well. It'll be very interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting process. So
I think there's a couple things with this last set, which is all about imaginings. One is, kind of can help with the training that I have, and so I think about river morphology and land morphology and saltwater body, which is larger than any other saltwater body in the world, and how the actual land would really look or could really look. And I kind of wonder if you wouldn't mind playing with some of our science, right?
So I missed that bit. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Because I think that it's it's not about getting it right, but it's about them modelling kind of the things that could happen or could have been. And so, while I think it's really nice to put this up as kind of a set of speculations, what's really interesting when you play with them, and there's a whole series of really interesting discourses now about rewilding and, you know, everything from your backyard to, you know, parks, etc. What does that mean now that that climate change has happened and we've disrupted ecology so much? You can't really rewild anything because it's still impacted by us and we're part of those systems. But it's a really interesting aesthetic, I'll say, at the moment, that actually lots of councils are adopting. So I think it's really interesting that we're worried about it from that particular part. But I have to say that what's happening everywhere else in this country is kind of coming back to this. And some of it's just through maintenance regimes or lack thereof. And so I keep coming back to not just the kind of beautiful building and the way it relates to certain aspects of where it's sitting and where, I mean, I'm sorry, but I think it's really great you have to raise it 1.4 because, you know, for fuck's sake, sea level rise and that lake in itself and I don't think it took away from the building. Actually, in some ways, it made it weirdly graceful. And that's not that the building was awkward before, but it made it have a different conversation with the landscape in transition, you know, as opposed to a landscape that's static side. So that's quite interesting. But coming back to this last set of drawings and what they mean in terms of resilience, I think I am quite curious as to how a scientist or an ecologist or a hydrologist would unpick, but also add to. And it's probably not about the accuracy, but thinking about what the potentials are.
Yeah. The interesting thing, and I agree with all that. The interesting thing is that 10,000 years ago on this site actually happened. It's indisputable. We just don't know what it is. But you could almost say that everything up to that point it actually has existed, and if you were able to work it out, you could define it. You know, but anything into the future is completely unknown. You know, and the more I look at the world, the more I think it's out of control. You know, and so the future I think is a really interesting place for us to be as architects and as designers, like people who are speculating about what things could be. I think the future is something that we should engage with more, and it would be interesting to know what scientists would sort of think about this. But it is also like, now I've told you that if I just quickly go back, now I've told you that the shape of the site actually had like a bay in the middle of it. Does that change what you think of the site? Because when you're down there, I mean, I had no idea. I had no idea that was the case. So, yeah, I think history is really interesting, and the future is also a place that we can start to sort of occupy. Sorry for all of that. I think I've gone past it. That one. You know, so this line is, you know, and the fact that there's water in here is something that is not, you don't feel that at all when you're on site. I mean, I know that it's just a few thousand years earlier it would have been over here somewhere, and then whatever 20,000-30,000 years it would have been, the water would have been pretty much out of Lake Macquarie, you know. So yeah, it's an interesting place to kind of think about. Okay.
So, Chris, when do we lose capitalism in your thing? Just can you...
3rd of November. I'm going to put a date on it.
Yeah, when the property boundaries gone? Because it kind of just disappeared at some point. I was like, well, hang on, what happened?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said, I mean, you can speculate against those things, but I don't know, you know, and it's just an interesting thing. I mean, will it continue like this? And I mean, certainly for the last 50 years, 100 years, we've been pretty static, actually. I know we've had a few world wars, but things have been quite stable. And so I don't think we've really felt things being unstable. yet, like in my lifetime or yours or something, you know.
It would be great to see that chaos step though. I agree with Sue-Ann as well about, I look at those drawings and feel like they could become a project, and to inform them, you know, what's not happening across that last series of images is much change to the morphology of the water body. And it would be so great just to understand, you know, to like be the writer of speculative history and speculative fiction that goes and consults with all the people to get the likely scenario, and then they would have such legs to, because that's the thing, that, you know, the 25-year building, the 50-year building, not the 100-year building, certainly not the 1,000-year building, or so I just see a lot of provocative agency in them, and it would be great to honour them as a research project in their own right.
Yeah. No, you know, I really agree about that.
But props on that.
Yeah.
So good sick.
But this spec, like, there's a tradition of architects imagining their buildings falling to ruin and depicting them slowly kind of decaying and falling.
Oh, you would.
I would
You
know.
would.
Just kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Can you imagine before art eventually?
Well,
Maybe he's got something. You need to build something into this design that, like, will last 10,000 years.
yeah, but is that important? I mean, there's that. I think the Japanese are quite good at the fact that everything has a life, and that something deteriorating reminds us that we also deteriorate and we die. So there is something embedded in the ego of an architect, particularly, that I build something and I want it to last. You know, I went to a Peter Stutchbury building. I remember, I think I'd just become a lecturer or something, and it's this really beautiful building, but it was designed to be like 300 years. You know, it was all made out of brass and concrete and whatever. And I just find that a bit desperate sometimes too. That you know, it's really beautiful, but it's sort of it's like you're sort of clutching onto something and hoping that it can outlive you. You know. But I think there's something quite nice in the fact that my house will deteriorate well before I do. You know, that, and I can see it go. You know, and that sort of, it makes me feel a bit better about myself. You know. And if you've been to my house, on like a really wet day, you know what I mean. Yeah. But there. No, sorry.
I was just going to say, what I love about this image is that I cannot think about it without thinking of Bill Gammage.
Yeah.
And imagine doing a series of drawings
Absolutely.
that came from that research.
Well, look, you know, I've read this book and you know, sure, you could definitely apply more science, and I think it would be an interesting thing to kind of do that. But that's a first account history. I mean, this is the best account we have of what this country looked like at that time.
You know, this wild green and that understory grass and that idea we've got to just let go and understand that land and the way that we use it as a resource as well as, you know, ecology. It's quite a pragmatic conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not based in aesthetics and prettiness and things like that. You've actually got to get beyond that a little bit.
The real estate of your building, your 104 square metres, you know, the productive function and value of that land as a GFA, because by building that building, you've brought communities together.
That's right. Yeah.
Pretty easy to justify building a park in that sense, which is wonderful. So it's just flipping the conversation about the value of this idea of open space.
That's right, and hopefully it can lead on to other things, you see. And this is part of the facade aging and things like this, which just seem like it's really small things, but they're actually kind of important.
Let things take their own life.
Yeah. Okay, so this is wrapping up in an hour, so it's become like a real thing. So thank you for listening, and.